Today, we examine the 6 worst deaths during world record attempts, from a man altering his breathing to stay underwater to an upside-down aerial escape record where questionable equipment turned a historic performance into a moment no one was prepared for. It was August 27, 2015, and morning heat shimmered across the Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah. The vast expanse of white salt stretched to the horizon under cloudless skies, with temperatures already exceeding 90 degrees as vehicles prepared for time trials along the measured course. Garrick Fro was 54 years old and had recently retired after 31 years as a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing firm. He had spent the past 18 months building a modified streamliner in his garage, targeting a high-speed class record in the upper 200-mile-per-hour range. Friends described him as meticulous in design work, but increasingly dismissive of outside input, particularly regarding safety concerns. The vehicle was a narrow, enclosed streamliner, approximately 20 feet long, powered by a turbocharged engine, producing an estimated 1,100 horsepower. Garrick fabricated much of the chassis and bodywork himself using lightweight materials. Although the car included required safety systems, inspectors later noted signs of aging and deferred maintenance. Event organizers required all vehicles to pass technical inspection before timed runs, examining systems such as steering, brakes, wheel bearings, and tires. Inspection staff later reported flagging Garrick's vehicle for rear tire concerns, noting visible cracking consistent with age and heat degradation. The inspector recommended replacing the tires before any high-speed attempt. Garrick argued the tires were sufficient for a single pass and became agitated when pressed, insisting the inspector was being overly cautious and delaying his run. The inspector maintained the vehicle could not be cleared without tire replacement. Garrick left the inspection area and returned to his transport trailer. Approximately 40 minutes later, during a staging window when multiple vehicles were being repositioned, he maneuvered the streamliner onto the course approach area without the required inspection approval markings. Course personnel initially assumed the vehicle had been cleared and did not immediately intervene. By the time officials recognized the discrepancy, the streamliner had already moved into position on the course. Radio calls and visual signals were issued, but Garrick proceeded with the run before the situation could be fully corrected. Shortly before noon, Garrick accelerated down the measured course. Timing equipment recorded his speed increasing steadily as the vehicle covered the distance. Observers stationed along the course later reported that the streamliner appeared stable through the first several miles, maintaining a straight line across the salt. At an estimated speed approaching 280 miles per hour, witnesses approximately 2 miles downrange observed a sudden burst of debris from the vehicle's rear section. The left rear tire failed catastrophically, fragmenting under rotational stress and instantly destabilizing the car. The streamliner yawed sharply left as asymmetric forces disrupted its balance. Its nose dug into the salt surface, and the vehicle slid laterally before breaking apart. Major components separated as the structure disintegrated, scattering debris across thousands of feet of the salt flat. The primary chassis section came to rest well beyond the initial failure point, heavily crushed and barely recognizable. Emergency response vehicles reached the wreckage within minutes. Garrick remained secured in the harness within the remains of the cockpit, but the structural damage was catastrophic. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from multiple blunt force trauma injuries incompatible with life. Investigation confirmed tire failure as the initiating event, with analysis showing age and heat-related structural degradation. Event organizers later enforced stricter inspection procedures, tighter tire age limits, and physical barriers preventing course access without approval. It was June 7, 2019, when afternoon sunlight illuminated the forested hills surrounding a reservoir in Washington state. A 2-lane highway bridge crossed the water at a narrow point, with the surface approximately 115 feet below the deck. The reservoir appeared calm, with light wind ripples, though visibility into the water was limited from the bridge height. No safety boats or emergency personnel were beneath the span. Sienna Maro was 27 years old and worked as an outdoor adventure guide, leading rafting and climbing excursions across the Pacific Northwest. She maintained an active social media presence centered on high-risk activities, often framing stunts as record-setting challenges. Former co-workers described her as fearless to the point of recklessness, frequently dismissing safety planning. That afternoon, Sienna arrived at the bridge with two friends to film what she described as an official world record high dive attempt. She intended to submit the jump to a major record-keeping organization, believing the height would qualify under published guidelines. Authorities had repeatedly cited illegal jumping at the site, which was clearly posted with no trespassing warnings. Witnesses later reported the group parked on the shoulder and climbed over a protective barrier to reach the outer maintenance walkway. The reservoir level was lower than normal due to seasonal drawdown, reducing water depth and exposing submerged hazards. Sienna had researched professional high diving records performed under controlled conditions, with trained divers and rescue teams present. She believed a documented 115-foot bridge dive could qualify for a record category, despite having only recreational cliff jumping experience from heights under 40 feet and no formal high-entry training. Her friends positioned themselves on the bridge deck with cameras ready, while Sienna climbed onto the outer railing. She wore a swimsuit and had removed her shoes, standing barefoot on the narrow metal rail approximately 3 inches wide. Wind conditions were light, though passing traffic caused intermittent vibration through the structure beneath her feet. According to witness accounts, Sienna hesitated briefly before announcing she was ready, shifting her weight several times on the narrow rail. She launched herself outward in a forward-leaning position, arms partially extended and legs together, attempting to gain horizontal distance from the bridge and avoid striking the structure below. As she fell, her body rotated slightly forward, reducing the likelihood of a vertical feet-first entry and increasing surface area on impact. Multiple observers along the bridge and shoreline watched her fall for approximately 3 seconds before striking the water. The impact was visible and audible from a significant distance. Witnesses described a large splash accompanied by a sharp concussive sound consistent with high-speed water impact. The shallow entry angle caused near-instant deceleration, producing severe blunt force trauma. Sienna lost consciousness immediately on impact, and her body did not resurface. One friend immediately called emergency services, while the other descended toward the shoreline to locate the impact point. Rescue teams arrived within 20 minutes, deploying boats and divers to search the reservoir. Sienna was located roughly 15 minutes later, submerged near the impact site in approximately 40 feet of water. She was brought to shore and pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic injuries consistent with high-velocity water impact. Autopsy documented multiple cervical spine fractures with spinal cord transection, catastrophic skull fractures, and extensive internal organ damage. Investigators concluded the forces caused immediate fatal trauma, with drowning not a contributing factor. Following the incident, the bridge was secured with enhanced physical barriers preventing access to the outer walkway. Authorities increased patrols, penalties, and warning signage, explicitly referencing the fatal risks associated with jumping from the structure. It was July 6, 2017, at a community pool in Mesa, Arizona, where late afternoon heat radiated off the concrete deck surrounding a rectangular lap pool. Recreational swimmers gathered in the shallow end while most lap lanes remained empty. Trent Callaway was 32 years old and worked as a personal trainer at a regional gym chain, managing client fitness programs and leading group conditioning classes. He maintained a modest social media following by posting workout routines and endurance challenges, drawing roughly 18,000 followers. Friends later described him as highly focused on online validation, closely tracking engagement metrics and comparing himself to other fitness influencers. That afternoon marked Trent's third self-declared attempt at a world record static apnea hold, which he planned to document and later submit to a major record-keeping organization. He was targeting a 10-minute underwater breath hold, believing it would meet publicly listed benchmarks for his category. Although he had reviewed submission requirements and arranged video documentation with witnesses, his preparation consisted of unsupervised bathtub practice, without certified freediving training or formal safety protocols. Pool management allowed filming during public hours after he signed a liability waiver. Two friends accompanied him to operate cameras positioned above and below the waterline, serving as designated witnesses for the attempt. A lifeguard later told investigators she warned Trent about shallow water blackout and advised against prolonged breath holding during public swim hours. Trent declined the warning, stating that visible intervention or assistance would undermine the validity of the attempt and reduce its perceived legitimacy for record submission. Before entering the water, Trent hyperventilated at the pool's edge for nearly 2 minutes, taking rapid deep breaths to suppress carbon dioxide buildup. Certified diving instructors later explained that this practice delays the urge to breathe while allowing oxygen levels to fall unnoticed, significantly increasing the risk of sudden unconsciousness. Around 4:30 that afternoon, Trent submerged in the shallow end wearing only swim trunks, settling into a seated position on the pool floor in approximately 5 feet of water. His friends began timing immediately as cameras recorded from multiple angles, verbally announcing elapsed time for documentation. The lifeguard remained roughly 40 feet away, monitoring other swimmers while periodically checking his position. For the first 5 minutes, Trent remained motionless with his arms crossed over his chest. Small bubbles occasionally escaped from his nose. By the 7-minute mark, witnesses observed subtle movements suggesting mounting distress, but he continued holding his breath as his friends urged him toward the 10-minute target required for the record. At approximately 8 minutes and 10 seconds, his posture changed abruptly. His arms dropped to his sides, his head tilted backward, and his body went limp. He began drifting upward slowly, face up and unresponsive. His friends initially believed the movement was intentional until they noticed the absence of controlled motion as his body continued drifting upward. The lifeguard entered the water within seconds, reaching Trent in under 10 seconds and bringing him to the surface. With assistance from bystanders, she moved him onto the pool deck. He was unresponsive, not breathing, and had a weak, difficult-to-detect pulse. Rescue breathing was initiated immediately while emergency services were contacted. When his pulse became undetectable after continued assessment, chest compressions were begun. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes and continued advanced resuscitation efforts during transport, but Trent remained unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at a nearby medical center approximately 40 minutes after the initial loss of consciousness. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be cerebral hypoxia due to drowning, triggered by shallow water blackout associated with pre-breath hold hyperventilation. The pool later prohibited prolonged breath holding and banned the filming of endurance or record-based attempts during public swim hours. It was March 21, 2016, and evening traffic moved steadily past a casual dining restaurant in Newark, New Jersey. Neon signs glowed along the commercial street as temperatures hovered in the low 40s. Inside, booths lined the paneled walls beneath vintage beer advertisements, and the smell of fried food drifted from the kitchen. Marissa Crane was 24 years old and in her second year of nursing school, balancing clinical rotations with part-time work as a pharmacy technician. She carried approximately $31,000 in student loan debt, lived with 2 roommates to reduce expenses, and was described as hardworking and financially strained. The restaurant had promoted a monthly eating challenge for more than 3 years, offering a $5,000 cash prize to anyone who could consume 75 chicken wings within 8 minutes. The challenge had recently been advertised as eligible for official world record submission through a third-party record registry, provided attempts were properly documented and witnessed. Participants paid a $50 entry fee, and fewer than a dozen attempts had been made, with no successful completions. Management later confirmed the parameters were set without medical consultation. Marissa learned about the challenge through a flyer at her workplace and researched record requirements online. She calculated that winning would eliminate nearly a sixth of her loan balance and registered for a scheduled attempt that Friday evening, despite having no competitive eating experience. Approximately 20 spectators gathered around a designated booth as staff delivered a large platter of sauce-covered wings. The manager reviewed the rules. Marissa had 8 minutes to consume all edible meat from 75 wings, with bones left behind as proof. Unlimited water was permitted, but leaving the booth or regurgitation would disqualify the attempt, and a visible timer was started. The attempt began shortly after 8 o'clock. Marissa started aggressively, stripping meat from bones and swallowing with minimal chewing. Grease and sauce coated her fingers as she worked quickly, barely pausing between bites. For the first 3 minutes, she maintained a steady pace while onlookers recorded on their phones. Staff refilled her water cup repeatedly as she drank between handfuls, wiping sauce from her hands between motions. Around the 4-minute mark, her pace slowed. Witnesses noticed increasing difficulty swallowing, and her breathing became audible and labored, with short pauses between bites. She shifted in her seat and briefly pressed her lips together, as if attempting to clear her throat. Friends later told investigators they urged her to stop, but she shook her head and continued. her face flushed and eyes watering as the timer continued to run. At approximately 6 minutes, Marissa suddenly stopped mid-reach and clutched her throat with both hands. Her mouth remained open as she produced choking sounds without effective coughs. Her shoulders tensed and her upper body rocked forward. The universal choking sign was immediately recognized by several witnesses, including a nurse dining nearby. The nurse moved behind her and began administering abdominal thrusts while the manager called emergency services. Nearby diners backed away from the booth as staff cleared space. Despite multiple forceful attempts, no obstruction was dislodged. Marissa's skin took on a dusky discoloration as she lost consciousness and collapsed forward onto the table. Responders lowered her to the floor and initiated CPR, repeatedly attempting to clear the airway between compressions. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and used advanced airway equipment, but the obstruction could not be removed. Marissa was transported under ongoing resuscitation to a regional trauma center, where physicians performed an emergency airway procedure. Circulation could not be restored, and she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from asphyxiation due to complete airway obstruction. Autopsy revealed a compacted mass of inadequately chewed chicken meat lodged at the level of the larynx. The restaurant immediately discontinued the challenge and later settled a wrongful death lawsuit filed by Marissa's family, subsequently prohibiting all competitive eating and record-based events. It was November 30th, 2018, when evening temperatures dropped into the 50s at a powerlifting gym in Houston, Texas. Industrial fluorescent lights illuminated rows of squat racks and lifting platforms across the open floor. Metal plates clanged as low music played, and a small crowd gathered near a designated platform in the rear corner. Declan Voss was 41 years old and worked as a warehouse logistics manager for a regional distribution company. He stood 6'2", weighed approximately 280 pounds, and had trained recreationally in powerlifting for nearly 8 years. Gym members later described him as competitive and dismissive of advice about his training methods. That evening marked Declan's planned attempt at a raw deadlift record, which gym staff said was being informally documented for potential submission to a third-party strength record registry, targeting 950 pounds to surpass the existing 925-pound facility mark. Raw lifting allows only a belt and wrist straps, placing extreme stress on the cardiovascular system. Declan had not undergone cardiovascular screening, despite staff recommendations, brushing off concerns about his age and the loads involved. Training partners had noted repeated signs consistent with extreme blood pressure elevation during heavy attempts, including pronounced facial flushing and neck vein distension. Approximately 15 people gathered as the barbell was loaded with iron plates totaling 950 pounds, verified by multiple witnesses. After warming up through lighter weights, Declan stepped to the bar around 7:30, secured his belt, and took a single deep breath before bracing. He pulled with maximum effort. The bar rose slowly as he extended his legs and hips, reaching full lockout for roughly 2 seconds. Witnesses reported his face darkened from deep red to nearly purple, with pronounced neck vein distension and visible tremor through his upper body. As he began lowering the bar, his knees buckled slightly and his posture broke, causing the bar path to drift forward and his grip to loosen. His expression changed abruptly, and he released the weight mid-descent. The bar struck the platform unevenly as Declan clutched his chest, staggered backward several steps, and collapsed heavily onto a foam mat, remaining motionless for several seconds before attempting to inhale. Training partners rushed to assist. Declan remained conscious briefly, gasping and unable to speak. His skin appeared pale and clammy, and his pulse was difficult to detect at the neck and wrist. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Within minutes, he lost consciousness and breathing stopped. CPR was initiated as others retrieved an automated external defibrillator. Paramedics arrived within 11 minutes and found Declan in cardiac arrest. No shockable rhythm was identified. Circulation could not be restored. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from acute aortic dissection with rapid hemopericardium and cardiac tamponade. Autopsy revealed a tear in the ascending aorta. Investigators concluded that extreme exertional blood pressure during the lift caused vessel failure in a weakened arterial wall. The gym later required cardiovascular clearance for near maximal lifts and posted exertion warnings. It was October 3rd, 2017, and early evening darkness had settled over a small theater in Brooklyn, New York. The converted warehouse space held roughly 120 seats around a central performance area, lit by overhead stage lights and exposed ductwork. A modest crowd had gathered for an independent variety show. Dorian Harwick was 35 years old and worked as a street performer throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn, specializing in escape artistry and magic. He supplemented his income with part-time bartending and struggled to afford rent in a shared apartment. Friends later described him as increasingly fixated on gaining recognition and frustrated by years of limited progress. That evening marked Dorian's featured performance slot, where he planned what he described as a record-breaking speed escape from a straitjacket while suspended upside down above the stage. Similar escapes had been performed by professionals under controlled conditions with certified equipment and redundant safety systems. Dorian's preparation had been minimal. He purchased used suspension equipment online, including a body harness and ankle cuffs, showing visible wear and frayed stitching at key load-bearing points. He did not conduct load testing or seek inspection from a qualified rigger. The theater's ceiling measured approximately 25 feet above the stage. Dorian directed the venue's technical crew, who lacked rigging training, to secure a rope system to overhead beams. The setup relied on a single load path without backup support. About 45 minutes before the show, Dorian performed a brief test suspension lasting under a minute while hanging motionless. He declared the setup adequate without testing it under dynamic movement or inversion. When his performance slot arrived, Dorian was secured into the straitjacket by an assistant while standing on stage. The ankle cuffs were attached, and the rope was raised using a manual pulley operated by a crew member backstage. Dorian ascended slowly until he hung fully inverted roughly 15 feet above the stage floor, with his head approximately 8 feet above the ground. The suspension line twisted slightly as his body settled, placing uneven tension across the harness. Audience members noted the rig creaked faintly as his weight shifted, the rope rotating with each adjustment of his hips and shoulders. The audience watched as Dorian began working to escape the straitjacket, using shoulder rotation, torso twisting, and forceful arm movements typical of the stunt. His motions grew sharper as he attempted to create slack, causing visible oscillation in the rope and sudden load shifts through the harness. After roughly 30 seconds of suspension, multiple audience members heard a sharp tearing sound echo through the theater. The harness failed at a primary stitching point near the waist connection. With no secondary support, Dorian dropped instantly, falling headfirst toward the stage. His body struck the surface with violent force, followed by a brief involuntary movement before he came to rest motionless. Screams erupted as audience members rushed toward the stage. Dorian lay on his back with the straitjacket still partially secured around his torso, his neck positioned at an unnatural angle. He showed no purposeful movement, and his breathing was absent or severely compromised. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes and found Dorian unresponsive with critical injuries. He was immobilized and transported under resuscitation to a nearby trauma center, where clinical findings later confirmed catastrophic cervical spine fractures and extensive brainstem injury. He died approximately 3 hours after arrival without regaining consciousness. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury and high cervical spinal cord transection caused by the fall. Equipment analysis confirmed the harness failed due to degraded stitching, unable to withstand dynamic loading. The theater permanently banned aerial stunts, faced a lawsuit from Dorian's family, and closed 18 months later. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.